On the podcast, teachers are set to strike again, unhappy with their pay offer, but they've just come off a 36% increase under the Labor government. Salaries rose by $27,000 for a secondary school teacher under Labor's time in office. Is next week's rolling strike ahead of 2 weeks school holidays justified or not? So let's go.
Are we paying these people to front up, or are we paying them to fly to Wellington to eat their lunch? Should you really lose your career for refusing to take part in a 90-minute lesson about Māori culture? This government doesn't actually have any idea how to get economic growth. Show us what you made of, Prime Minister.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.
Duncan Garner, Editor-in-Chief, proudly sponsored by the Brothers Green. Unlock the innate power of New Zealand botanicals to support your mobility. Try the Brothers Green New Zealand Move Joint Support Tonic and join over 20,000 other Kiwis experiencing easier movement. For as little as $1 a day, you too can experience the power of New Zealand hemp seed oil for your joint health. Always read the label. Take as directed. Supplementary, of course, to a balanced diet. The Brothers Green, Christchurch. Okay, welcome to the podcast. I'm Duncan Garner. Please subscribe. And tonight, it's the teacher strike. Is it justified when teachers have just had their biggest pay rise in history? Can it be justified to walk out in classrooms next week, which is what's happening, when they've just pocketed the biggest pay rise ever in the history of New Zealand teaching? So their offer international reflects inflation. Isn't that what everyone's getting? If you're lucky, you're getting that. The government has no money, so should teachers demand more when there is nothing? And when they've just had their lion's share of the biggest pay rise in the history of teaching. And they get 12 weeks paid leave. And also, Ashley Church tonight sums up the week. Charlie Kirk, Tucker Teferis and Tom Phillips as well. Let's go.
It's the Slam Dunk.
Okay, teachers have voted to have rolling strikes all next week, the week leading into 2 weeks of school holidays. Just what we want as parents. The kids home even longer. And I see our school, the one I'm at, has a teachers only day on Friday, so it's a nightmare. So strike Wednesday, off Friday. 2 weeks, school holidays after that. Not paid, because almost 70% of all secondary teachers now get paid over $100,000 a year. They're arguing they don't get paid enough. But 70% of all teachers now get paid over $100,000 a year, and they get 12 weeks fully paid time off. It's not the worst package in the world, is it? But still they remain unhappy and have voted to strike all next week. Unhappy at National's revised pay offer, which was 3% over 3 years. Now its new offer included consecutive pay rises of 2.5% 1 year and 2.1% the next year. So that's over 2 years. What's that? 4.6%. And teachers at the top of the pay scale, compared with the previous offer of 1% pay rises over 3 years, were doing well. Other teachers would get pay rises of $1,300 and $1,200, equivalent to 2.75 to 4% after 2 years, depending on their place on the salary scale. So they were all going up. It reflects inflation, and that's all that's happening in the private sector. Inflation adjusted raises, pay rises, if you're lucky. And remember, teachers have just come off their biggest pay rise ever. It was simply massive under Labor, and it pushed the majority of teachers in our secondary schools over $100,000. And some can now earn up to, I looked at the scale before, $106,000, $107,000. The government also wanted to increase the number of days teachers could be called back to work when schools are closed from 10 to 18 a year. They hate that. And they wanted to axe the reimbursements for expenses like childcare in those days. Whose work pays for childcare? I think it's ridiculous to strike over this latest offer. As it stands, teachers, as I said, have come off their biggest pay rise ever. Labor hiked their pay big time. In 2023, which is not that long ago, teachers got a 14.5% pay increase. So teachers at the top of their pay scale had an increase of $27,000, or 36% over that Labor government at that time in office. $27,000. Jan Tinetti, the Education Minister at the time, said it was one of the most significant pay increases New Zealand secondary school teachers have ever received. That's how she said it. Beginning secondary teachers, she said, received an increase of almost $10,000 to their base pay at the end of 2024. Most teachers received a lump sum payment of over $7,000 extra. Experienced secondary teachers on the top scale will receive an increase of over $13,000 to their base pay. That was by the end of last year. And by the end of last year, they earned more than $103,000 a year before allowances. Labor crowed about that result, and they said 67% of secondary teachers in New Zealand now earn a base salary of more than $100,000 a year. Making teaching, and this was Labor's words, making teaching the well-paid job it should be. So why suddenly a year later isn't it considered not well paid enough? It can't be both. This offer they rejected was good enough. It was 4.6% over 2 years. Who's getting that in the real world? The new offer included consecutive pay rises of 2.5 1 year, 2.1 the year after. The government also wanted to increase those teacher-only days as well, when they are called back from 10 to 18 a year, and actually reimbursements for the childcare, as I said. PPTA President Chris Abercrombie said that his members did not believe that the deal was good enough. We believe it's insufficient to meet the needs of secondary schools, secondary students, and the secondary teaching profession. It's not about the kids. You're striking. It's about your own standards and what you accept. He says teaching's harder than ever, but the government has still failed to meaningfully address the unmet student need in classrooms at the same time as we face once-in-a-generation changes to secondary school assessment and qualification systems. But last year, Labor said that these increases meant it would be an end to the disruption and the disrupted learning that we've all experienced. I know that will come as great news, said Labor, to parents and caregivers, and we thank them for their patience throughout what's been a tough time. What utter bullshit. A year after saying that, we now face another week of disruption. Just a year after Labor delivered the biggest ever pay rise in teaching history, and with another 4.6% on the table, they're going to strike again. Of all the things they could do, they're going to strike again. And of all the things they could do, maybe they could see that our kids are doing better in school. Our kids have consistently gone backwards in all the international rankings for the last 20 years. Yet at the same time, teacher pay is through the roof on record levels. Significantly, student achievement is down. And still the teachers go out on strike demanding more money. Yet our student performance is down. Truth is, our kids are going backwards. And at what point do we hold the teachers and teaching to account for that? Teachers, in Labor's own words, are now well paid, and they said they would stop industrial action. But it didn't last long. Within a year of their biggest pay rise, they were out on strike again. And are our kids doing better? No. I think the teachers are tone deaf. They're not reading the room. Parents don't want their kids at home this week. They want them in school, especially with 2-week school holidays approaching. And teachers have failed to read this room. They do not understand. There's no money. Everyone's been cut back or lost their jobs or faced lower pay rises or none at all. The case for the strike's not justified. Teachers have just had record pay rises. They enjoy record long paid holidays. And they've been offered more pay rises to meet the cost of inflation by this government. And still they're striking. It's a hard one to accept and a hard one to swallow, in my view.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.
Okay, joined now by our panel. Our panel of one today because Ashley Church is with us, but Stuart Nash isn't. Can you find Stuart anywhere, Ashley?
No, and I'll tell you what, mate. I feel like I'm on the end of a seesaw where one end's up and I'm sort of down at the other. It's a very uncomfortable and unusual feeling. But I haven't looked for Stu because I'm actually as you could probably tell from my surroundings, I'm in Christchurch, and I'm pretty sure he's not hanging out here at the moment.
No, but maybe he isn't hiding somewhere down there. Who knows? But
well, let's try. I'll look a bit harder after I get off this call.
Make sure you knock on every nook and cranny, and let me say that correctly as well. Now he's gone bush.
Yeah.
He's gone bush. So your views?
So a bit of background. I had never met Stu until I started doing this show with you. I obviously knew who he was. He was a guest at the same time as I was, I think, for the first couple of shows.
Yep.
And so on the basis of that, because we're both in Hawke's Bay, as you naturally would, I made an effort to go and have a coffee with him, and we chatted. And I found I really liked him.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that I didn't expect to. I just didn't know what to expect. And he's got views that are much more in line with my own than I would have thought, given his political affiliations or his past political affiliations, and just found him a good guy. And then, of course, we've been doing the show, and it's been building in popularity over the last few months, and I've just found a real affinity with him. And so this New Zealand First News, which I think you and I sort of had some inkling of, wasn't overly a surprise. And he looked like he was doing all the right things to get himself into the space that he needed to. Winston was saying, with a bit of courting going on, Winston was saying all the right sort of stuff in return. And then this comment comes out last week, and I remember I actually got a text from Bob McCoskrie, and I thought it was a joke originally, and turns out it wasn't. And just remember putting my head in my hands and thinking, Stu. It's an interesting step. On the one hand, not his finest moment, but then who am I to criticize him? I mean, people in glass houses. My life hasn't been the finest track either. I think the issue for him now, because he's had to give up his role with the Taxpayers Union. He's given up a role, I understand, with Robert Walters, And, so that's going to hit him financially. But the big prize for him, Duncan, the big prize, I think, was always going to be this New Zealand first thing. And if you'd asked me a couple of days ago, I would have said that's history. But Winston's making some interesting comments in the media which suggest that all is not lost.
No, and it looks to me like Winston's going to give him a lifeline. And let's be honest, I mean, Stu, I've spoken to him a couple of times this week to see if he's all right, to be honest. Touch base, because I really value what he brings here on the podcast, and he'll be back next week. For a former minister who's been media trained and knows all the things to say, it was a slip, a rugby changing room moment.
Yeah, it was, and it was interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've read some of the stuff that he's put out since. He's obviously, frantically talked to a few media to try and sort of retract what he said. He's got a post on LinkedIn, which I've read a couple of times. I think he clearly feels remorse, although there's been a couple of probably well-pointed comments saying you're not necessarily remorseful, you're just disappointed that you've been caught out. I do think he's remorseful. I do think he regrets what he's done. Let me just turn that off. Excuse me.
No, he's really remorseful.
And what's that?
He's really remorseful.
Yeah, he's remorseful, and hopefully it's a step, a misstep along the way, and he'll find himself back where he wanted to be, and in that New Zealand First caucus, if indeed that's where he wants to be.
Yeah, you can't sink him in forever based on that slip. No. And what is a woman? If I asked you the question, I mean, I always said it's my mum.
I just got exactly the same thing. My mum, my sisters, my wife. The important woman in my life. If you want to get into the science of it, it's a woman genetically is different to a male genetically. It's the other half of man, and they are a real thing. They're not they're not an idea. They're not something that you imagine in your head and think that you might be. They are a real thing, and they exist.
They are. If he'd said vagina and breasts, you'd get away with it.
Well, I still think it would have been beyond the pale, to be honest, because it just didn't need to go there. And as you said, I think it was just one of those moments where, in a relaxed moment, he's kind of let his guard slip and he said something. That,
what if a woman said cock and balls?
Same thing. Same applies. There's probably a lower bar for women in terms of what they can get away with, but even so, I would think it would be unacceptable too.
Okay, so looking at this week, a number of things have dominated. I've found it a really unsettling week with the Tom Phillips stuff that's been around, Ashley. It's just deeply troubling what's coming out of there.
I'm really struggling, to be honest, Duncan, to get a handle on this, because there's a whole lot of conflicting information. I'm hearing stuff. I'm sure you are too. Let's look at what we know at the moment. But put aside the last 3 or 4 years that he's gone bush with these kids, and just look at the situation as it currently stands. We know that he shot a cop, and we know that another cop shot him. So that's a fact. That's something that's established, and he's dead as a result of that, and the cop was injured. What we don't know is what led up to that. We don't know the circumstances of how that came about. We don't know whether there was provocation by the police in any way that led to that, or whether that's an action that he's taken. I have to say too, Duncan, that even if there was provocation by the police, there are no circumstances under which it's acceptable. So those people who are saying, "Oh, well, the police have pushed him into a situation where he's taken a shot at them," that's nonsense. There are no excuses for taking a shot at the police. So on that basis alone, I tend to lose a bit of sympathy with him. But I just, the stuff I'm hearing at the moment, I'm at a point where I'm just thinking I need to sit back and wait and see what the details of this thing actually are, because I think there's a hell of a lot more to come out that we don't know, which may or might not necessarily impact on what happened on the day that the shooting took place, but will give us some context as to what had actually happened in that 3 or 4 year period prior.
Yeah, and which is deeply troubling. I mean, there's all sorts of things going around. It's sort of like in New Zealand, it's such a small country that this sort of stuff travels, and people will understand what's.
Yeah, we're probably hearing the same thing.
Yeah, so until something like that, facts are established and everything, there's not much we can say except to say that as a loving father myself of 4 kids, there's under no circumstances would I take my kids into the bush for 4 years.
No, although it's funny you should say that, because up until I hadn't taken much notice of the story. I was probably less of a consumer of news about this than a lot of people. I sort of saw the odd thing. My wife would fill me in a little bit, but most of the time I just sort of it went over my head. And if I had any view on it at all, and this was probably naive and ignorant in hindsight, but I probably saw him as a bit of a Robin Hood character.
Yeah.
I probably saw him as somebody who was trying to do the right thing by his kids, and while I thought that was a pretty stupid thing to have done, I kind of I understood the motivation behind it. in hindsight, particularly given what I'm hearing, and that was a stupid view to hold. And there are no circumstances. I don't care what's going on in your relationship and what you think your spouse may or may not have been doing, and with respect to your custody rights of your kids, there are simply no circumstances where it's okay to take your kids and hide them in the bush. And that
For 4 years, actually.
Well,
4 years.
4 years. Yeah. What has that done to the kids? I mean, what's the impact on them going to be? What are they going to be like, mentally and socially over the next 4 or 5 years? Are they going to recover from this? Or is this going to screw them up for the rest of their lives?
Oh, I think it will have lasting impacts across generations, potentially, Okay.
Totally.
I think the cops, they sort of laid off him a bit because they actually knew that he was a dangerous thug, an armed thug. That's what he became.
Well, that's the other moving part in this, sort of digesting information about it. The other moving part is why weren't the cops taking the thing more seriously earlier? That's the question that's being put to me, or that I've had suggested to me. And I think that's a little bit unfair, because it suggests New Zealand's a big country in terms of its, you can go bush in this country pretty easily, and particularly for somebody, I understand he had a pretty good understanding of bushcraft. Pretty unfair to suggest that somehow they weren't taking the case seriously because they weren't out there scouring the forest.
Charlie Kirk, you're a man that is a huge proponent of free speech and the right to free speech. It's appalling. So first let me say, very little shocks me. Very little shocks me. This shocked me to my core yesterday. Yeah.
This was like 9/11 or the Christchurch mosque shooting. It was that sort of level of, wow. Oh my God. I know who this guy was. I consumed his content on YouTube, used to watch him. He did these things because he had a couple of different groups. But he had a group called I think it was called the Bring America Back group, or Bring America Back tour. And he went around campuses around the country. He'd been doing it for quite some period of time. And I used to watch, it was fascinating to watch, because he'd have university students and he would answer questions from them. So he'd sit in this thing with a little tent over him. It was always the same format. And people would ask him questions about his faith and about some of the views, the ideological views that he held. And there would always be some dissenters, and he would treat those dissenters with respect, and he would answer their question, and they wouldn't necessarily agree with them, but it would be an interesting conversation. And there was obviously a lot of supporters in the audience as well. And I think he had kind of created this group of support around the country as a result of the fact that he'd been doing this over a long period of time. By the way, I didn't realize he was only 31.
31.
If you'd asked me prior to yesterday, I would have said he was in his 40s.
Yeah, I said 42. 31's young, man. 31. Yeah. He's got 2 kids.
So an extraordinary young man. So he'd been doing this, and it was at one of these events that this took place. Now, what's been happening, what's interesting is the outfall of this over the last 24 hours here in New Zealand. The American media is predictably taking the divisive side that it would on the issues, but the media tends to fall on one side or the other. The New Zealand media, almost without exception, is falling on the side that he's some sort of right-wing crackpot. Even Mike Hosking. I mean, I rate Hosking. And even Hosking's comment, and I'll love it, I can't remember it word for word, but it was something along the lines of describing him as one of those people who spread disinformation. Now, that's just not true. I mean, this guy's views, you may not agree with them. You don't have to agree with them ideologically, but it wasn't disinformation. He had views around, I think Hosking accused him of having views on Biden and COVID. Well, over the period of time I've watched him, he's never had a view on COVID at all. His views tended to be around things like free speech, as you mentioned, which was a real big deal for him. The rights of the unborn, which was obviously important for him. He was a big supporter of Israel. He was against the lunacy around the LGBT stuff, and he was an advocate of Christian values in society, the same Christian values that have shaped our society.
What's so dramatic about that?
If you went around this country, what's that, mate?
What's so dramatically right-wing crackpot about that?
That's my point. If you went around the country and you talked to your average Kiwi about their views on this stuff, I reckon you'd find most Kiwis actually share similar views. So he's not even on the right. He's right smack bang in the centre in terms of New Zealand politics. Yeah. But the New Zealand media seem to think that the determination of where you sit politically is the echo chamber of their newsroom. Yeah. It was just bizarre. But really, really, really sad situation for somebody who I think was making a real difference in a really positive way.
Yeah, and I don't know how it gets out, but it does get out. Nothing is private anymore. Nothing's safe in terms of that space. But the imagery and I don't know if you saw it, but
is that going to happen here? Is that going to happen here, though? I mean, are we going to have people taking pot shot at people? Because that's the crux of this issue.
Possibly.
Not so much. Yeah, well, it's not so much that people disagree with them; it's the fact that that somebody was prepared to actually take a rifle and take a shot at him and kill him. So what it's saying is, if I don't agree with your view, I'm not going to debate your view. I'm going to kill you. I mean, that's an
It's
extraordinary
brutal
development.
thuggery, and there's no place for that in the world, no place for that in New Zealand. I mean, David Seymour was going for a walk the other day with his partner through Epsom. Now David Seymour's not the flavour of the month with certain sections of Māori community. What happens if some nut job wants to
Yep.
do that? I think we're complacent, Ashley. I think we're bloody complacent to this.
I do too, and I mean I did a big post on this yesterday and just talked about this very issue and said that this is a turning point in a lot of ways, and
Yeah.
it's a turning point. It's not a turning point that's happened in the last couple of weeks or the last few months. It kind of started, and you and I have talked about this before with Stuart as well. There's kind of, if you wanted to define it, it kind of dates back to that sort of COVID period. There was something that changed in not just New Zealand, around the Western world. There was something that changed in the fabric of society that took what used to be discourse where you could sit around a barbecue and you could talk to people about your different views and you could agree to disagree and have a beer and and get on with it, to this I don't agree with you and I'm no longer going to be your friend mentality. And that I don't agree with you and I'm no longer going to be your friend has turned into no, I don't agree with you and I'm going to kill you. So this evolution of division that seems to be taking place first in the States, where you would expect, because it's that kind of society, but ultimately in other parts of the Western world, it's actually quite frightening. And it plays over so many levels. I mean, we talked a few days ago about Te Pāti Māori, and that space concerns me too, because we've gone from a disagreement over issues around the settlement of this nation to, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, the potential for armed insurrection if we're not
You've
careful
said that.
from
Yeah.
either side of this issue, because
Yeah.
we've got such polarization of people who refuse to listen to the other side.
Well, I reckon this stem from, you're right, I think this stem from a real collapse in trust in international media, not just here, but all around the world. There was a collapse in media trust, right? And then so everyone started to get their own podcast and their own views, and everyone became citizen journalist or citizen opinion writer on air. And then suddenly someone didn't like it. See, so social media has let this stuff travel, and that's been the rise of that last 5-10 years. And COVID really highlighted it, and there we are now.
Look, I completely agree with you. And I mean, I'm old enough to remember, I mean, I was born in the 60s, and I'm old enough to remember when there was one major TV station, one radio station, and, basically one newspaper in each community. And that was your source of all news. And
We're sort of back there now.
unspoken contract.
We're back to that. We're back to that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I was going to say that the unspoken contract was that those media sources were unbiased as much as they could be. So you could have confidence and trust that whatever you were being fed through those media sources from a news perspective was going to be relatively fair and balanced, and that you were going to get two sides of an issue. Again, 2020, roughly that Jacinda Ardern period and the change that took place in media newsrooms around the country, that's all gone out the window. The days of media focusing on making sure that it provides a balanced view on any given issue, those are gone. Now, it's about the media now believe, I'm convinced of this, Duncan, the media now believe that it's their job to educate you in the wrongness of your view.
Yeah.
So they know what's best, and most of them are kids. They know what's best. They know how the world should run. They know what the right answers are for this stuff. And if you don't share with their view, what you're propagating is misinformation or disinformation, and you need to be reprogrammed and your views need to be corrected. And God forbid that they would bring in another voice, because that voice would actually give credence to a view other than theirs.
This is so
it's
true.
a completely different phenomenon.
I have daughters in this space. Who have gone as far to the point as not talking to me at the moment because of some of my views on a few issues, which are entirely allowed. To be honest, I have an opinion. This is my job. Because I'm not of their opinion, that we're having a sort of a mini disagreement at the moment and within the family. I mean, it's just bloody ridiculous. It is sadly difficult.
I agree. We need to be a little bit careful because there's always been a rite of passage between mums and dads and their daughters and sons. So there's always been an element of the succeeding generation disagrees with the preceding generation, and it's kind of the spreading of your wings thing that goes on. So that I think there's an element of that which is not only normal but it's healthy. It's healthy for kids to question their parents. This is more than that though, and I suspect what you're describing with your daughters is more than that. This is an ideological mindset that says you're wrong and you need to be corrected of your wrongness, and you need to be educated about the wrongs of your ways. And it started, 15, 20 years ago with things like climate change and some of these other things where we were beaten up with the idea that we weren't just informed. And, now it's getting into gender identity and a whole range of other issues around which this generation and the one preceding it believe that we don't know what we're doing, that somehow we've destroyed and stuffed up society, and that they're going to correct it all, and that they need to put us in our place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if the last text I got was along the lines of, you're an embarrassment and you're a racist, and I simply can't have your name. I can't refer to your name as my name, and and I'm just thinking, you'll grow up one day. But it's just the.
It wasn't from your mum. It wasn't from your mum. Was it?
Mum's right of Genghis Khan. No, but this is it's the lack of tolerance from those seeking tolerance. They're completely intolerant, and you saw that with Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, and how do you come back from this, Dunk? How do you bring society back? Because you're right. Part of it's the result of the fragmentation of information, which has happened pretty much since social media started, and really accelerated again since about 2020. So I used that example before where I talked about the one newspaper, the one TV station. Now you've got 1,000 sources of information in any given day. In fact, one of the things I've taken to doing is, and it's something you've probably tried as well, because I use ChatGPT and AI a lot, is basically saying to ChatGPT, these are the topics I'm interested in any given day. Give me a summary every morning, and make sure it's unbiased. Make sure it gives me both sides, and it does that. And I get my little digest, which means I avoid all that stuff completely. I think that's going to be an even greater and greater thing with people over the next few years, to the point where the ability for unbiased information about any topic to be communicated in a way that makes sense is going to be almost impossible. Everything will be filtered and channeled through the sieve of the way that people see the world.
Exactly.
And that's actually quite frightening.
Yeah. Now, finally, the Te Pāti Māori MP, Duncan Ferris. We spoke about him earlier in the week. This guy, I mean, a week's a long time in politics. He doubled down on his criticism of that, the social media post that said no Asians, no blacks, no Indians, no Chinese, whatever. I think this guy's terminal. I don't think he can be fixed.
Yeah. So as there is with all of this stuff, a couple of moving parts to this. So moving part number one, may not agree with Ferris, but I understand what he's doing. The point that he's trying to make is the Māori Party is as I say, whether you agree with him or not, the Māori Party represents Māori, and therefore, it's appropriate for me to advocate on behalf of my people. And so he's taken this position. In fact, he's doubled down on this stuff. And he came out earlier this week with an 8-minute video basically saying that what he previously said was correct, and here was why. Now, here's the thing. His party has distanced himself from this, which surprised me initially, but I think I understand why they've done this. So you've got this increasing division taking place between Ferris himself and Te Pāti Māori. And I thought about it. Because they're not losing support. What Ferris is doing, let's be honest, you and I might not like it, but Māori will love it. The people that support them will love it. So I still believe they're going to win all 7 seats, and I believe that this sort of stuff feeds absolutely into that kind of racist dialogue. Here's why I think they're backing away. It's got nothing to do with support from their own supporters. Te Pāti Māori will be looking at the polls at the moment. They will be salivating over the idea that there is a possibility of them forming a government with the Greens and Labour at next year's election. But they will also understand that Labour are also looking at these same results, and Labour will be saying to themselves, we've got to be really careful about how much we indicate we support these guys. At some point, they either have to clean their act up, or we have to say we won't do business with them. So if you're the Māori Party, you're looking at the moment and thinking we could actually close ourselves out of government if we're not really careful. We may not mean it, but we need to at least give the impression that we can work with Labour and that we're going to be a responsible coalition partner, and we're not going to get a chance to be in government. And that explains, in my mind, Duncan, why they're taking the view that they are currently on Ferris. So if that's true, one of two things will happen. Either they'll tolerate him because they'll say one thing to the public and they'll do it. They'll, on the one hand, they'll just kind of put it behind them and pretend it's not happening. Or, and I'm not entirely sure this will happen, they'll expel him from their caucus on the basis that what he's saying is causing too much reputational damage to them in a way which would mean that they couldn't do a coalition deal with Labour. Yeah, I reckon they won't expel him because they actually believe him. So they are distancing themselves for the obvious reason that they need to be seen to be slightly reasonable. But they've held a similar view to this guy for years. They're a whole protest movement. They've infiltrated Parliament. The second thing is, totally agree. The second thing is, if they've moved him away from being whip or something, it's hardly a demotion. That's all it will be. They believe. I mean, they stood there the other day and said that we were here only by their invite only. They firmly believe this guy Ferris, they're all from the same DNA and the principles,
They're not any
By the
different.
way, and I've forgotten the name, their current whip. I see they've just demoted their whip and they've put Marama Davidson in her place. And I saw a bit of media about it this morning from David Farrer of all people, indicating that it was over lack of performance. But again, so it's this. It all feeds into this idea that they are trying to position themselves as a responsible party that's going to be a credible player in a coalition government, which is really interesting because we haven't seen that from them before.
Yeah, they also run the risk of having to give the centre left confidence in supply and have no influence at all in the government. So and then they'd become the bum boys of the left, but they will achieve nothing.
I don't think that's what they want. I think they want to be in government.
Of course.
That's why they recognise that they have to at least appear to be credible and able and responsible in a party that Labour can.
Ngāti Wapaka trying to look reasonable. Ngāti Wapaka and Rawiri, although they did go to ground, haven't seen much since, but they'll tolerate him. Expelling an elected MP, because that's what he is, expelling an elected MP brings all sorts of difficulties and fights.
I completely agree with you. And by the way, I just said Marama Davidson, of course, he's in the Greens, so should mean Ngāti Wapaka.
Same thing.
Same
completely.
thing. So I mean, this will be suiting them because on the one hand, it's bolstering and reinforcing their support within the Māori community. Ferris is saying everything that they've been saying for years, but they have to look like they don't agree with them. They're distancing themselves.
The guy's an idiot. Here he is arguing that the Indians and Asians, whatever he said, blacks, are campaigning against a Māori. No, they're not. They were campaigning for another Māori to replace another Māori. That's what they were doing. They were campaigning for a Māori. You know, he's a fucking idiot. You know?
Yeah. Hey, by the way, one of the interesting things in all of this is that, and I think he actually said it in his video, I don't know if you've ever looked into critical race theory and this whole idea of white privilege and all this other stuff that goes with it. But within critical race theory, you can be racist and I can be racist with our white skin, but Māori can't be racist. So Māori can say stuff that we would find outrageous and they can say terrible things about Europeans, but that's not racist because only white people can be racist. That's an extrapolation of critical race theory. So that explains why this behaviour goes on, and they can sit there with a straight face and continue to say it.
Well, you can't claim racism because you've never been on the end of it. They would say, you can't say you can't say what's racist or not. You don't have the ability to because you're white. Yeah, that's the argument, isn't it? Okay, have we missed Stu today?
Oh, look, mate, it's been the dynamic's completely different, I have to say. I mean, as much as I love our chats and I love talking to you, I was thinking as I was sitting here listening to you, I suppose it's the bit of humour and stuff that he brings to it, which kind of lightens it up a bit. So, yeah. So hopefully he'll. If you're watching, Stu, I hope that you're you're feeling a bit better and that you'll be back in the seat next week and we'll be having our normal conversation.
Back in the saddle next week, yeah. Good on you, Ashley. Have a nice weekend, mate. I appreciate it always. Well done. Okay, let's do some letters to the editor. And g'day, Duncan. Great work you do on the podcast. I've been watching, listening, reading your journalism for the best part of 20 years now. But what the fuck's going on this week? A private citizen has asked one of the most mundane, unintelligent, and obvious questions you could ask anyone. What is a woman? The only people who should be asking this question are kindergarten teachers in a learning environment. He gave a truthful answer, albeit using slang, that is. Let's be honest, quite common in this country. Now, the outfit he worked for initiates formal review into his truthful comments. What actually needs to be investigated here? Someone speaking the obvious truth. He apologised for speaking the truth in a way that some find offensive and resigned from his job. Meanwhile, an elected representative is spewing out divisive and, in my opinion, toxic xenophobic comments on his own volition. As far as I'm aware, no formal review has been announced by his employers, which is utterly disgraceful. Wokeism continues to take off in this once grand and egalitarian country we grew up in. I'm looking forward to seeing Mr. Nash back on the panel next week. Please pass on my best regards to him. I'm off to rewatch your interview with Dr. James Lindsay to get a little perspective on the WTFism. Have a great weekend, James. Let's be real. If it was a couple of females talking on a podcast and one was asked what someone with a dick and a set of balls would not even register on the Richter scale. So I think we're all good with the ridiculous fake shock and elitist pretense. Says this email. Ardern was celebrated for using the word prick by the same drooling feminist dictators and their low testosterone panty-wearing male enablers. Seymour saying French love the cock was hilarious. The common man is actually very forgiving, says Mickey. Appreciate the emails, guys. Along with a few other friends, this is another email I have talked to, I will not be listening to your podcast if Stuart Nash is still on it. Being involved with Sean Plunkett was his first mistake. Sad. As I didn't mind Stuart, but now I know his true feelings about women. Not anymore. Pity his wife and kids right now, says Trish. So there's a mixed view. Trish, he'll be back. And I reckon you might be too. That's us, folks. Thanks so much for your feedback, of course, all your support. Get in touch with our social media at Duncan Garner Podcast, TikTok, Instagram, or flick us an email at duncan@rover.nz to my team, Lockie and Brody. Thank you, guys. Brody, thanks for the hard work and for your work at the podcast. And remember, life isn't a dress rehearsal. There's no curtain raiser. This is it. We live in one of the best places on earth. So get out and enjoy it and have a great rest of the day, folks. Take care. Ta-da.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.